Maria Victoria of Bourbon, born in 1847, was destined to become a pivotal figure in Spanish and European history, though her early years would be marked by turmoil and conflict. As a child of the Bourbon family, she was born into one of the most prestigious royal houses in Europe, yet her formative years were far from serene. The political unrest that enveloped Spain throughout the 19th century would shape her character, her sense of duty, and her role in the destiny of Spain itself. Maria Victoria's father, Carlos Maria Isidro de Bourbon, was a key figure in the Carlist Wars, a series of brutal conflicts fought over who should rule Spain. These wars were not merely about territorial control or military dominance, they were about deeply entrenched ideological beliefs. Carlos, Maria Victoria's father, was the leader of the Carlist faction, which sought to place a legitimate heir of the Bourbon family on the throne, opposing the more liberal factions who supported Isabel II. This ideological division cast a long shadow over Maria Victoria's early years. The Carlist Wars, which began in 1833, raged on for several decades, destabilizing Spain and causing immense suffering to its people. Maria Victoria was born amidst this turmoil, her childhood spent against a backdrop of war, shifting alliances, and political intrigue. Despite being part of the royal family, her early life was far from the glamorous image often associated with royalty. It was a life marked by uncertainty, with her family living in exile at times due to the ongoing conflicts. From a young age, Maria Victoria was introduced to the harsh realities of royal politics. Her education was steeped not only in the traditional disciplines of royalty but also in the strategic thinking required to survive in a world where political alliances were as important as personal integrity. The Bourbon family, particularly her father, ensured that she understood the importance of the throne and the role of her family in shaping the future of Spain. Her father, a devout and passionate Carlist, instilled in her a deep sense of loyalty to the Bourbon dynasty, a loyalty that would define much of her actions later in life. In many ways, Maria Victoria's upbringing was typical for a royal princess. She was educated in the arts, literature, languages, and etiquette, yet her education was also uniquely tailored to prepare her for the challenges ahead. It was not just about preparing her to be a queen consort, but to be a woman who could influence the political landscape of Spain. In her youth, Maria Victoria showed a keen understanding of politics, and her conversations often centered on the future of Spain and the Bourbon family's role within it. Her family, despite being caught in the struggles of the Carlist Wars, had always maintained its claim to the Spanish throne. As a direct descendant of King Charles IV, Maria Victoria was positioned to play an important role in the future of Spain. The world around her, however, was in constant flux. The death of Queen Isabella II in 1868 would throw Spain into a period of deep instability. The monarchy was in disarray, and the question of succession was no longer straightforward. As Maria Victoria grew older, the political climate in Spain grew increasingly tense. The Carlist faction was still a powerful force, and although Maria Victoria's father had died, the legacy of the Carlist cause lived on in her family. Her mother, Infanta Luisa of Spain, was equally committed to the Bourbon cause, and Maria Victoria was raised to uphold the family's ideals. However, despite the Carlist ideology's grip on her early years, Maria Victoria was aware of the changing dynamics of Europe and Spain. As the country struggled with its identity in the post-Isabella era, a new opportunity emerged. In 1868, following the abdication of Queen Isabella II, Spain found itself searching for a new king. The political chaos created a power vacuum that threatened the very foundation of the Spanish monarchy. Amid this uncertainty, a young Maria Victoria was about to be thrust into a marriage that would change not only her life but the future of Spain itself. In the mid-1860s, her family began to search for a suitable match to strengthen the Carlist position and to help stabilize Spain's fractured monarchy. This search would eventually lead Maria Victoria to a union with Amadeo of Savoy, the son of the King of Sardinia. At first glance, the marriage might have seemed like a simple royal match, but it was much more than that. It was a union born out of political necessity, a marriage that would align the Bourbon family with the powerful Savoy dynasty of Italy. Though young and still in the process of coming into her own, Maria Victoria had been groomed for this moment. She knew that her marriage to Amadeo would be crucial not only for her family but for the future of Spain. She was aware that Spain was on the brink of an important historical shift. and her role in it could be transformative. The marriage would serve to unite two royal families, one from the Spanish Bourbon line and the other from the Italian Savoy dynasty, both of which held claims to the European thrones. Maria Victoria's personal feelings toward Amadeo are unclear, but what is certain is that their union was both a personal and political endeavor. As the daughter of a man who had fought for the throne of Spain, Maria Victoria understood the weight of her royal duty. She was not just marrying for love or for personal happiness. She was marrying for the future of Spain and the Bourbon family. In 1867, Maria Victoria and Amadeo were married in a grand ceremony that marked the beginning of a new chapter in both of their lives. The marriage was not without its challenges. Amadeo, despite being an Italian prince, faced significant opposition as a foreign monarch. Spain was deeply divided, and many saw his accession as a threat to Spanish sovereignty. Yet Maria Victoria stood firmly by his side, understanding that their union was part of a larger political scheme that could bring stability to Spain. The road ahead was not an easy one, but it was a road that Maria Victoria was ready to walk, knowing that her actions and decisions would have a profound impact on the history of her country. Thus, Maria Victoria's early life was a story of political alliances, royal expectations, and personal sacrifice. She was a princess born into a world of conflict, and her marriage to Amadeo of Savoy would set in motion a series of events that would change the course of Spanish history. The stage was set for the young queen consort to step into the spotlight and face the challenges of being both a royal figure and a key political player in the turbulent world of 19th-century Spain. As Maria Victoria's early years unfolded amidst the storm of political upheaval, little did she know that her role in shaping the course of Spain's future would soon become more profound. The decade following her birth had seen a rapidly shifting political landscape as the Carlist Wars gave way to the uncertain reigns of Queen Isabella II and the eventual collapse of her monarchy. By 1868, Spain was left in disarray, having been subjected to the collapse of its old monarchies and the crumbling of traditional royal structures. Amidst this turmoil, Maria Victoria's destiny would soon intertwine with that of an unlikely monarch, Amadeo I of Savoy. Maria Victoria's family, having lost their claim to the Spanish throne with the abdication of Isabella II, found themselves embroiled in the search for a way to reinstate the Bourbon family as rulers of Spain. Her father, Carlos Maria Isidro, had died in exile, but his Carlist ideals lived on through Maria Victoria and her mother, Infanta Luisa of Spain. The political climate, however, required more than just a royal birthright. It required the strategic forging of alliances. While Maria Victoria was still a young woman, the decision was made by her family to seek out a suitable marriage partner who could restore their prominence in the Spanish political sphere. The search was not only for a man of royal blood, but one who had the potential to garner political support and stabilize the increasingly unstable Spanish monarchy. The timing could not have been more critical. Spain needed a new king, one who could navigate the complex web of political factions, including Republicans, liberals, Carlists, and regional forces. The ideal candidate, though not a Spaniard, was found in Amadeo of Savoy, the son of the King of Sardinia, Vittorio Emanuele II. Amadeo, an Italian prince, was seen as an outsider by many in Spain, but his candidacy was appealing to those seeking a solution outside of the domestic factions vying for the throne. His family's connections to the House of Savoy, along with their Italian roots, were strategically beneficial in the context of European politics. Maria Victoria's marriage to Amadeo was therefore not just a matter of royal romance, it was a carefully calculated political move. The union was intended to strengthen the position of the Bourbon family and to offer Spain a king who could potentially unify the country's divided factions. Her marriage to Amadeo would be pivotal, not only in cementing the Bourbon family's claim to the throne, but also in potentially changing the direction of Spain's history. In the years leading up to their marriage, political negotiations between the Bourbon and Savoy families were intense. The prospect of Amadeo ascending to the Spanish throne had many supporters, particularly those within the liberal faction. But he also faced strong opposition from the Carlist supporters who viewed him as an outsider. For Maria Victoria and her family, the marriage to Amadeo of Savoy was the answer to a much-needed reconciliation between the old Bourbon family and the turbulent political forces of Spain. The engagement was officially announced in 1867 when Maria Victoria was just 20 years old. The union was seen by many as a political necessity rather than a love match. But that did not diminish its significance. The marriage between Maria Victoria and Amadeo marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. For Amadeo, it was an opportunity to solidify his claim to the Spanish throne. For Maria Victoria, it was the chance to play a central role in shaping the future of a nation in crisis. In 1867, Maria Victoria left her native Spain to marry Amadeo, journeying to Italy to meet her future husband. Their marriage took place in a grand ceremony in the city of Turin, symbolizing the union not only of two royal houses but also of two nations at a crossroads in European history. Though their union was rooted in politics, it was not without its own personal significance. The young princess and the Italian prince shared common goals of stabilizing Spain even as they faced the skepticism of those around them. Upon their marriage, Amadeo of Savoy became the heir to the Spanish throne, and Maria Victoria took her place as Spain's queen consort. The political ramifications were enormous, as their marriage represented both the hope and the uncertainty of a nation in turmoil. The royal couple's first days together were filled with optimism and anticipation, as they were heralded as the answer to Spain's political woes. Their marriage was seen as an opportunity to bridge the divisions within the country, offering a figurehead for both the liberal factions and the monarchy's traditionalists. However, Maria Victoria's role as queen consort would be immediately tested. While the political circles surrounding her were optimistic, many within Spain viewed her marriage with suspicion. As a foreigner, Amadeo was seen by many as a puppet monarch, too closely tied to the political interests of Italy and European powers to command the loyalty of the Spanish people. As his wife, Maria Victoria too would be subject to the same distrust and skepticism. The young queen consort, like her husband, would need to prove herself capable of leading the country through a time of immense instability. For Maria Victoria, the marriage was both a personal and a political challenge. She entered the Spanish court with a sense of duty and responsibility, but also a recognition that her role would not be an easy one. As she acclimated to her new life in Spain, she would be forced to navigate the political minefield that was the Spanish monarchy, balancing the expectations of her family, her husband, and the Spanish people. Despite these challenges, Maria Victoria's early days as queen consort were marked by a sense of determination. She quickly realized the importance of her position not only in supporting her husband's reign but also in influencing Spain's future. Though her power was largely ceremonial, she understood that her actions, her appearances, and her involvement in royal affairs could sway public opinion and cement her place in Spanish history. Maria Victoria's marriage to Amadeo was a pivotal moment in the history of Spain, a union that held the potential to heal the political divisions that had plagued the country for decades. It was the start of a journey that would test both her resilience and her capacity to influence the course of events. The early years of her reign as queen consort were only the beginning of a tumultuous period in Spain's history, and Maria Victoria's role in shaping that history would continue to unfold in the years to come. Maria Victoria's arrival in Spain as the queen consort was met with both anticipation and skepticism. Spain was a kingdom in turmoil, deeply divided after the abdication of Queen Isabella II and the ensuing political strife that accompanied the unstable transition of power. Amadeo of Savoy, her new husband, was seen by many as an outsider, a foreigner thrust into a deeply entrenched political conflict. And though the marriage between Maria Victoria and Amadeo had been hoped to bring stability, the challenges that awaited them would prove far more complex than either had imagined. Upon their arrival in Madrid, Maria Victoria quickly understood the weight of her role. As queen consort, she was expected to represent the monarchy not only within the court but also to the people of Spain, a nation that was fiercely divided along political and ideological lines. The liberal factions had accepted Amadeo's ascension as a necessary step, but many others, particularly the Carlists and conservative factions, viewed him with disdain. Their opposition to his reign was not just a political stance but a reflection of their profound distrust of the foreign-born king. As the wife of Amadeo, Maria Victoria found herself caught in a delicate balancing act. She had to walk the fine line between supporting her husband's rule while also trying to win over a public that was unsure of her and her husband's legitimacy. Despite these challenges, Maria Victoria was determined to fulfill her duties as queen. She threw herself into the royal obligations with a deep sense of duty, determined to show the people of Spain that she was a queen who would stand by her husband, regardless of the opposition they faced. One of her earliest engagements was hosting royal banquets and court functions where she tried to project an image of a united and harmonious monarchy. She also took on the role of participating in charity work and supporting various social causes which allowed her to connect with the people of Spain on a personal level. Her charitable actions, though not enough to win her universal support, did earn her some admiration from those who saw her as more than just a figurehead. Maria Victoria's most significant challenge, however, came from within the Spanish court itself. The palace was rife with political factions, and despite her best efforts to project an image of unity, she quickly learned that the Spanish monarchy was far from unified. Political machinations at court were constant, and many of the aristocracy and even some members of her own family were less than enthusiastic about her role as queen consort. There were whispers about her marriage to Amadeo, with some viewing it as a pragmatic political maneuver rather than a genuine royal union. As queen, Maria Victoria was constantly scrutinized, not just for her personal qualities but for her ability to support her husband's embattled reign. Amadeo I, despite his initial optimism, found himself increasingly isolated. The pressures of ruling a divided Spain, coupled with the constant opposition from the Carlists and the growing instability within the country, began to wear on him. As the political and military situation deteriorated, Maria Victoria became not only a source of emotional support for her husband but also a key player in trying to keep the monarchy afloat. She encouraged him to stand firm in the face of opposition, even as the royal couple faced repeated challenges to their legitimacy. At the same time, Maria Victoria understood that her role as queen consort was not just about supporting Amadeo's reign, it was also about protecting the legacy of the Bourbon family. While Amadeo's reign was marred by constant strife, Maria Victoria held fast to the belief that the monarchy could still have a place in Spain's future. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes to support her husband's initiatives, particularly those that sought to appease the liberal factions of Spanish society. However, her influence in this area was limited by the fact that her position as queen consort was largely ceremonial, and the real power lay with the factions that controlled the political machinery of Spain. Despite her best efforts, the political situation only grew worse. The Carlists, who had been opposed to Amadeo's rule from the outset, launched a series of military campaigns, further destabilizing Spain. As the Carlist forces gained ground, Maria Victoria found herself increasingly worried about the safety of her husband and their family. The conflict reached its peak during the Third Carlist War, a bloody and brutal conflict that threatened to tear Spain apart. As the royal family was forced to flee from one part of the country to another, Maria Victoria's resolve was put to the test. She stood by her husband's side, offering him both counsel and comfort as the pressure mounted. Throughout this period, Maria Victoria became more than just a symbolic figure. She took an active role in organizing royal retreats and negotiating with foreign powers for military aid, even though her influence was often limited by the factions that held power. But as the war raged on, it became clear that Amadeo's rule was unsustainable. The growing divisions within the Spanish political system, combined with the continued military challenges, made it increasingly difficult for the king to maintain his position. During these early years of her reign as queen consort, Maria Victoria was forced to confront the harsh realities of royal life. Her role was often one of compromise, balancing the conflicting demands of the Spanish court, the people, and her husband's supporters. But despite the difficulties, Maria Victoria's devotion to Amadeo and to the Bourbon family was unwavering. She believed deeply in the monarchy and in her role as a stabilizing force for Spain, even as it became clear that her husband's reign might not survive the mounting pressures. It was during this time, as the political and military situation grew more dire, that Maria Victoria's true character began to emerge. She demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity and a commitment to her duties that surpassed many of her contemporaries. Her strength, though often understated, became a source of support not only for her husband, but also for those who saw in her a symbol of hope amidst the chaos. Despite the growing challenges, Maria Victoria remained determined to fulfill her role as queen. She continued to represent the Spanish monarchy abroad, attending state functions and attempting to strengthen Spain's diplomatic ties with other European powers. However, as Amadeo's political position became more precarious, Maria Victoria also found herself increasingly isolated. Her husband's abdication seemed inevitable, but Maria Victoria, ever the dutiful queen consort, stood by him, hoping against hope that Spain would find a way to reconcile its divisions. The early years of Maria Victoria's reign were a period of personal sacrifice, political maneuvering, and emotional strength. She had entered the Spanish court as a young, hopeful queen consort, but over time, the pressures of her position had hardened her into a woman capable of navigating the treacherous waters of 19th-century Spanish politics. But even as the situation grew more desperate, Maria Victoria remained committed to her husband and her family's legacy. She would soon face the most difficult decision of her life, whether to continue supporting Amadeo's faltering reign or to accept the inevitable abdication that seemed destined to end the dream of a Bourbon restoration in Spain. The reign of Amadeo I, though short, would go down in history as one of the most turbulent periods for the Spanish monarchy. The optimism that initially surrounded his ascension to the throne soon gave way to a series of political crises, military challenges, and social unrest. As the new king of Spain, Amadeo I was tasked with stabilizing a deeply divided country, but the task was far from simple. The forces of opposition were relentless and his authority was challenged at every turn. Maria Victoria, though a young queen consort, quickly realized that her role would not be one of mere ceremonial importance. Her husband, Amadeo I, despite his noble intentions, found himself caught in a political storm. He was a foreigner, an Italian prince, thrust into the heart of Spanish politics. Many saw him as an outsider, a puppet of foreign powers. And this perception made it difficult for him to command the loyalty of the Spanish people. From the outset, Amadeo's rule was plagued by political instability. The liberal factions, who had supported his ascension, were themselves divided, and the more conservative Carlists continued to wage war, seeking to restore the Spanish monarchy to their vision of the Bourbon family. The threat of the Carlist faction loomed large, and as their forces gained strength, Amadeo's position as king grew increasingly precarious. Maria Victoria, while not a political player in the traditional sense, found herself deeply involved in the efforts to support her husband's reign. She was determined to do whatever she could to help him maintain control and protect the monarchy. The Spanish court was filled with intrigue, as factions vied for power, and Maria Victoria became an important figure in navigating the delicate balance between these competing interests. Her support was crucial to Amadeo, providing him with the emotional strength he needed to continue in the face of mounting opposition. One of the earliest and most significant challenges to Amadeo's reign came from within the military. The Carlist forces, who had been waging a war to restore their version of the Bourbon monarchy, posed a constant threat to the stability of Spain. The Third Carlist War, which erupted in 1872, was a violent and destructive conflict that saw the Carlist forces marching across northern Spain. For Amadeo and Maria Victoria, the war was a constant reminder of the fragile nature of their position. The Carlist insurgents, led by Carlos VII, refused to accept Amadeo as the legitimate king of Spain, and they launched a series of military campaigns aimed at overthrowing him. As the war raged on, Maria Victoria's role became increasingly significant. While Amadeo was busy dealing with the military and political crisis, Maria Victoria took on the responsibility of helping to organize support for the Spanish army and coordinating with other European powers for diplomatic assistance. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes to secure financial and military aid, all while managing her royal duties and maintaining appearances at court. She was not only a queen consort in name but a queen who took an active role in the political and military challenges that threatened her husband's reign. Yet, despite her efforts, the war with the Carlists continued to drain Spain's resources and morale. As the conflict escalated, so too did the opposition to Amadeo's rule. The people of Spain were divided, and many were disillusioned with the monarchy, seeing it as ineffective in resolving the country's political and social problems. Maria Victoria, though loyal and determined, was not immune to the growing discontent. Her marriage to Amadeo, once seen as a hopeful union between two royal families, became a symbol of the monarchy's failure to unite the country. Amadeo, despite his efforts, was unable to gain the full support of the Spanish people. The political factions that had initially supported him began to turn against him, and the instability within Spain reached new heights. The conservative factions, particularly the Carlists, continued to challenge his authority, while the liberals grew increasingly frustrated with his inability to solve the country's deep-rooted problems. The military, which had initially supported him, began to waver, and several key military leaders defected, further weakening his position. Maria Victoria, ever the supportive wife, tried to remain optimistic. She encouraged her husband to stay the course, to fight for his legitimacy, and to continue striving for stability. But the writing was on the wall. The political situation had become untenable, and even the most determined efforts to maintain control seemed futile. Amadeo, who had come to Spain with the hope of restoring order, was now facing the reality that his reign was doomed. Throughout this tumultuous period, Maria Victoria remained steadfast. She continued to fulfill her royal duties, attending state functions and supporting Amadeo I in his efforts to negotiate with foreign powers. But as the war dragged on and the political situation grew more desperate, Maria Victoria began to question whether their efforts were in vain. The Carlists were gaining ground, and Spain was increasingly divided between those who supported Amadeo's reign and those who sought to overthrow it. The most significant turning point came in early 1873, when the pressure on Amadeo reached its peak. The Carlist forces had made significant advances, and the political factions were more divided than ever. The military, which had once supported him, was now in open rebellion. The Spanish people, weary of war and political instability, began to lose faith in their king. Faced with the growing unrest and the realization that his rule was unsustainable, Amadeo made the difficult decision to abdicate. Maria Victoria, ever the loyal and supportive wife, was devastated by her husband's decision. She had stood by him through the darkest days of his reign, but now she faced the painful reality that the dream of a Bourbon restoration in Spain was over. The abdication of Amadeo was a blow not only to him personally but also to Maria Victoria, who had invested so much of herself in supporting the monarchy. In the final days of Amadeo's reign, Maria Victoria remained a constant presence by his side, offering him the emotional support he needed to face the inevitable. She understood that his abdication, while painful, was the only way to end the political crisis that had engulfed Spain. But even as she prepared to leave the Spanish throne behind, Maria Victoria held onto the belief that the Bourbon family would one day return to power. The struggles of Amadeo I's reign, marked by war, political strife, and personal sacrifice, ultimately ended in failure. But through it all, Maria Victoria remained steadfast in her commitment to her husband and her family. Her role as queen consort, though short-lived, had been one of immense personal sacrifice and political struggle. She had navigated the complex and dangerous waters of Spanish politics with grace and determination, but the forces arrayed against her husband were simply too strong. As Amadeo's abdication marked the end of his reign, Maria Victoria's journey as queen consort was far from over. She would soon face new challenges as she returned to Italy with her husband, adjusting to a life in exile. Yet, despite the hardships she had faced, Maria Victoria's loyalty to her husband and her belief in the Bourbon cause remained unwavering. The political and personal struggles of these early years would shape her into a woman of resilience and strength, a woman whose impact on Spanish history would continue to be felt long after her husband's abdication. The Third Carlist War, which erupted in 1872, became the defining conflict of Amadeo I's brief reign. While it had been building for years, the war reached a fever pitch after Amadeo ascended the throne. The Carlists, who supported the claim of Carlos VII to the Spanish throne, viewed Amadeo's foreign birth and his tenuous grasp on the crown as an affront to the true Bourbon legacy. The Carlist forces, fiercely loyal to the idea of a Spanish monarch from their own bloodline, rejected Amadeo's rule outright and began a brutal campaign across northern Spain. For Amadeo and Maria Victoria, this war was more than a military struggle. It was a test of their commitment to the monarchy and their resolve as a royal couple. Spain was torn apart by the Carlist forces, and the royal family found themselves at the center of a battle not just for the throne, but for the future of the nation itself. The war's consequences would shape the entire Spanish royal family, and the personal toll it took on Amadeo and Maria Victoria would be profound. During the early years of the war, Maria Victoria threw herself into the defense of the monarchy. She knew that her husband's position was weak, and that the Carlist forces, bolstered by support from traditionalists and rural areas, were a formidable enemy. As Amadeo struggled to gather military support, Maria Victoria focused on ensuring the morale of the court and maintaining a sense of dignity and stability in the royal household. Her role was not limited to ceremonial duties. Maria Victoria became actively involved in the coordination of royal support, helping to raise funds and organize relief efforts for soldiers fighting on the front lines. She frequently met with officials, diplomats, and military leaders, working tirelessly to ensure that Spain's allies in Europe provided aid. Though her involvement was often constrained by the traditional expectations of a queen consort, Maria Victoria's deep involvement in the war effort demonstrated her unwavering loyalty to her husband's cause. Yet, despite her efforts, the war did not favor Amadeo I. The Carlist forces, led by Carlos VII, were able to capture key areas in the north of Spain, and their resistance only grew fiercer as the conflict dragged on. The war caused severe economic strain on the nation, and the Spanish people, already disillusioned by Amadeo's foreign reign, began to turn against the monarchy. The social and political fractures in Spain were widening, and the country seemed to be descending into chaos. Maria Victoria, meanwhile, watched as her husband, once filled with youthful optimism, began to struggle under the pressure of the war and the political opposition. The weight of ruling a fractured Spain was taking its toll on Amadeo. He grew more isolated and disillusioned, as his attempts to unite the country through diplomatic and military means failed time and again. Despite Maria Victoria's constant support, it became clear that the monarchy's position was becoming untenable. The Carlist forces were relentless, and their hold on parts of Spain threatened the stability of the entire country. As the war intensified, Maria Victoria's role evolved. No longer just a figurehead, she became a symbol of resistance to the Carlist forces. Her image as a steadfast queen consort was used to rally supporters and boost morale. In public, she continued to attend royal functions, visiting soldiers at the front and delivering speeches that championed her husband's cause. She appeared at military camps, offering comfort to those who were fighting for the crown, and worked to ensure that the royal family's presence was felt throughout Spain, despite the war's hardships. But the emotional toll of the war was undeniable. Maria Victoria, who had already endured so much for the sake of her family and her country, was beginning to show signs of strain. The war not only threatened her husband's reign but also placed the royal family in grave danger. As the Carlist forces advanced, it became increasingly likely that Amadeo's reign would collapse under the pressure of war and political disarray. In 1873, after more than a year of intense conflict, the situation in Spain reached a breaking point. The Carlist forces had made significant gains, and the political factions supporting Amadeo began to crumble. The Spanish army, stretched thin by the prolonged war and weakened by defections, was no longer able to hold back the Carlist forces. Despite Maria Victoria's best efforts, the monarchy's position in Spain was weakening, and it became clear that a change was imminent. Amadeo, who had hoped to restore peace and stability to Spain, now faced the bitter reality that his reign could not withstand the pressure of war, political opposition, and public discontent. In the face of overwhelming adversity, he made the heart-wrenching decision to abdicate the throne. His abdication in February 1873 marked the end of his brief reign, and the monarchy in Spain was left in disarray. For Maria Victoria, the decision to abdicate was a crushing blow. She had stood by her husband through every battle, every diplomatic negotiation, and every military defeat. She had supported him emotionally and politically, believing in his vision for Spain, but now the dream of a restored Bourbon monarchy seemed to have ended in failure. Yet even in the face of this defeat, Maria Victoria remained resolute. She knew that her role in supporting her husband had been vital, and she held on to the belief that the Bourbon family would one day return to power. The impact of the Carlist War on the royal family was immense. It not only shattered the illusion of a stable monarchy, but also marked the end of a significant chapter in Spanish history. The war and Amadeo's abdication led directly to the establishment of the First Spanish Republic, a brief and turbulent period in Spain's history that would last only until 1874. Maria Victoria, once queen consort, was now a figure in exile, facing an uncertain future alongside her husband. In the aftermath of Amadeo's abdication, Maria Victoria and her family returned to Italy, leaving Spain behind. Though she had been a queen, her title now held little significance in a country that had rejected the monarchy. Yet, even in exile, Maria Victoria continued to support her husband, offering him the strength he needed to carry on with his life. The war with the Carlists, though devastating, had shown her true character. A woman of resilience, loyalty, and unwavering support for her family. Her time as queen consort was marked by immense challenges and sacrifices, and while her reign was brief, it left an indelible mark on the history of Spain. Maria Victoria's legacy would forever be tied to the tumultuous reign of Amadeo I, a monarchy that, despite its failure, represented the dreams and aspirations of a country caught between tradition and change. The abdication of Amadeo I in 1873 sent shockwaves through Spain, not only because it marked the end of a foreign dynasty's attempt to rule the country, but also because it exposed the deep fractures within Spanish society. The political turmoil that led to Amadeo's departure created an atmosphere of chaos, with factions fighting for dominance and the Spanish monarchy itself left in tatters. Maria Victoria, now a queen consort without a throne, found herself at the heart of a new kind of struggle, one not involving military forces, but the fractured political landscape of Spain. In the aftermath of Amadeo's abdication, Spain descended into a period of political instability. The monarchy was officially abandoned and the First Spanish Republic was declared. But this new government was weak and lacked the legitimacy necessary to gain the full support of the Spanish people. The collapse of the monarchy left a vacuum that would be filled with political infighting, military coups, and a general sense of disillusionment that pervaded every level of Spanish society. For Maria Victoria, the transition from being a queen consort in a regal court to a figure without power was jarring. She had spent years navigating the difficult political landscape of Spain, supporting her husband as he faced resistance from the Carlists, the military, and even his own court. Now she found herself exiled, her role reduced to that of a woman whose title had lost its meaning in the eyes of the Spanish people. Yet despite the profound loss of her position, Maria Victoria's sense of duty and loyalty to the Bourbon family did not waver. She had dedicated herself to supporting Amadeo's reign, believing in the vision of a united Spain under the monarchy. But now, with Spain teetering on the edge of political collapse, she was forced to confront a new reality, one where the monarchy seemed anachronistic, and the future of her family's rule appeared uncertain. The political landscape in Spain was deeply divided, with Republicans, Carlists, and other factions vying for power. The First Spanish Republic, though an attempt to resolve the political crisis, was marred by internal divisions and a lack of cohesive leadership. Political instability seemed to define the period, and many Spaniards, particularly the traditionalists, yearned for the return of a stable monarchy. However, the question of who would sit on the throne was no longer simple. With Amadeo's abdication, the Bourbon family's claim to the Spanish throne had been severely undermined. Maria Victoria, once the queen consort, now faced the harsh reality of exile. She was no longer a queen in the eyes of the Spanish people, and the dream of restoring the Bourbon monarchy seemed increasingly distant. Despite these challenges, Maria Victoria remained resilient. Her loyalty to her family and the Bourbon cause was unwavering, and she refused to give up hope that the monarchy could one day return to Spain. In the quiet of exile, she and Amadeo discussed their future, trying to come to terms with the loss of their position in Spain. But Maria Victoria, ever the dutiful wife and mother, focused on maintaining a sense of stability for their children, who were now living in Italy. Though their royal status was no longer recognized by Spain, she kept the traditions of the Spanish court alive within her family, ensuring that their children would grow up with an understanding of their royal heritage. The political opposition to Amadeo's reign, however, had not been limited to the Carlists. The broader Spanish populace had become increasingly disillusioned with the monarchy, especially the foreign-born king who had not been able to unify the country. Many Spaniards had hoped that Amadeo's reign would be a period of healing and stability, but the continued warfare, political instability, and lack of tangible reforms led to widespread dissatisfaction. As the Republicans gained power, their disdain for the monarchy grew, and many began to see it as an outdated institution. The public sentiment against the monarchy became more pronounced, further diminishing the prospects for a Bourbon restoration in Spain. Maria Victoria, in exile, saw all of this unfold from afar, but it was clear to her that her family's return to the throne was becoming less likely with each passing day. In the face of such adversity, Maria Victoria's role shifted. No longer the queen consort of a ruling monarch, she became a symbol of the monarchy's fall from grace. Despite her loss of political power, she remained a figure of resilience, unwavering in her belief in the monarchy's importance to Spain's future. The public's rejection of the monarchy was painful for Maria Victoria, but it was also a moment of reckoning. Her family had once stood at the pinnacle of Spanish political life, and now they were reduced to exiles with no clear path back to power. As the political landscape in Spain continued to evolve, with the Republic floundering and the Carlists still fighting for their claim, Maria Victoria had no choice but to come to terms with the fact that her family's role in Spanish history was shifting. Yet, despite her personal grief and the apparent loss of her royal title, Maria Victoria remained a dignified and strong figure. Her devotion to Amadeo and to the Bourbon cause was unwavering, even if it seemed that history was moving in a direction that left the monarchy behind. The political turmoil that engulfed Spain after Amadeo's abdication was a harsh reminder of the fragility of royal power. But it was also a testament to Maria Victoria's resilience in the face of overwhelming opposition. Her commitment to her family and to the values that had guided her reign remained steadfast, even as the world around her changed. In the years that followed, as Spain continued to struggle with its identity and political future, Maria Victoria's life in exile took on a new meaning. She remained a figure of quiet strength, supporting her children and keeping the memory of the Spanish monarchy alive in their minds. The political battles of the Carlists and Republicans raged on. But Maria Victoria, like many exiled royals, turned inward, focusing on the preservation of her family's legacy rather than any tangible return to power. Through all of the personal and political losses, Maria Victoria held on to one core belief: the Bourbon family was not just a symbol of royalty, but a key part of Spain's history. And though her reign as queen consort had ended in defeat, her family's role in the nation's future could never be erased. The moment of crisis that led to the abdication of Amadeo, the one in February 1873, marked not only the end of a short-lived reign but also the culmination of a long period of political and social turmoil in Spain. For Maria Victoria, the final days of her husband's rule were fraught with immense personal strain, but also a sense of inevitability. After all the sacrifices, the military defeats, and the political opposition, it had become clear that Amadeo's position as King of Spain was no longer tenable. The monarchy's legitimacy had been undermined by a series of failures. And despite Maria Victoria's unyielding support, there was little hope left of restoring stability to the nation. The situation had become increasingly dire. The Carlist forces, who had been challenging Amadeo's rule since the outset of his reign, had gained ground in northern Spain. At the same time, the Republicans, who were eager to see Spain embrace a more democratic form of government, continued to undermine the monarchy at every turn. The military, once a pillar of support for the king, had grown increasingly disillusioned, with many generals defecting to opposing factions. The country was caught in the grip of rebellion, and the monarchy, once the symbol of Spanish unity, had become a source of division. Amadeo, already a foreign-born monarch in a country that had long prided itself on its tradition of Spanish rulers, felt the weight of the growing opposition. The Carlists' persistent rebellion, combined with the ideological battles between Republicans and liberals, had made it impossible for him to rule effectively. With each passing day, the monarchy's grip on power weakened, and the very people Amadeo had hoped to unite were now demanding his abdication. Maria Victoria could feel the pressure mounting. She had stood by her husband through every challenge, but as the crisis deepened, she knew that the dream of a restored Bourbon monarchy in Spain was slipping further away. In the final months leading up to Amadeo's abdication, the atmosphere in the royal court became increasingly tense. The once bustling halls of the Spanish palace now seemed eerily quiet, as many royal courtiers and advisors began to distance themselves from the monarchy. Maria Victoria, ever the devoted wife, did what she could to hold the royal household together. She attended to the needs of her children, maintained appearances at court, and continued to represent her husband in public. But privately, she knew that the situation had become untenable. The monarchy's position had become untenable, and the burden of keeping the dream of the Bourbon dynasty alive was becoming too great for even her strong resolve. Amadeo, for all his qualities as a man of principle and idealism, was not a politician, and the political landscape of Spain had shifted beneath his feet in ways that he could not control. The country was divided along too many lines: liberal versus conservative, centralists versus regionalists, monarchy versus republic, and Amadeo had no means of unifying these forces. Though he had come to Spain with the hope of bringing peace and stability, his efforts had only exacerbated the divisions in the country. The abdication itself was a personal and emotional moment for both Amadeo and Maria Victoria. After months of contemplating the future of his reign, Amadeo made the fateful decision to step down. The public announcement of his abdication sent shockwaves through the country. For many, it marked the end of the Bourbon monarchy's reign in Spain, and the beginning of a new era, one marked by political instability, revolutions, and ultimately the establishment of the First Spanish Republic. For Maria Victoria, the abdication of her husband was the ultimate blow. She had stood by his side throughout the most difficult period of his reign, believing that the monarchy could still be restored. But now, she was faced with the reality that her family's position in Spain had come to an end. She had hoped for a different outcome, a return to stability and unity. But now her husband was leaving the throne, and Spain was entering a period of uncertainty and strife. The loss was not just political, it was deeply personal for Maria Victoria. She had sacrificed so much for the monarchy, and yet, in the end, it had not been enough. Despite the shock and sorrow that accompanied the abdication, Maria Victoria remained composed. Her role as queen consort had always been about more than just wearing a crown. It had been about loyalty, duty, and service to her husband and her family. Now, with Amadeo's abdication, her life would change forever, but her sense of duty to her family and the Bourbon legacy would remain unshaken. The abdication also marked the beginning of a new chapter for Maria Victoria and Amadeo. With their return to Italy, they were no longer royalty in the traditional sense, but rather exiled monarchs. Their royal titles stripped away by the political chaos of Spain. Yet, despite their loss of power, Maria Victoria and Amadeo would continue to play important roles within their own circles. They would focus on their children and their family's future, far away from the political turmoil of Spain. In exile, Maria Victoria and Amadeo lived a life of relative quiet, far removed from the courtly intrigues and battles that had defined their time in Spain. The years following their abdication were marked by a deep sense of personal reflection and reconciliation with the reality of their situation. Amadeo, once a king, was now a man without a throne. But Maria Victoria remained by his side, providing him with the support he needed as they navigated this new phase of their lives. Yet even in their exile, Maria Victoria remained loyal to the ideals of the monarchy. She kept the memory of their reign alive for their children, ensuring that they would grow up knowing the significance of their heritage. She held onto the hope that one day the Bourbon family would be restored to the throne of Spain, but she also understood that it was a hope that might never be realized. For Maria Victoria, the abdication of Amadeo marked the end of an era in Spanish history, an era of dreams, of ambition, and of royal duty. But it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in her own life, one in which she would find strength in her family and her enduring loyalty to her husband and the Bourbon legacy. It was a bittersweet conclusion to a tumultuous period, but Maria Victoria faced the future with the same dignity and resolve that had defined her time as queen consort. Amadeo I's abdication in 1873 sent ripples through Spain, and the shockwaves were deeply felt by Maria Victoria, who had stood by her husband's side throughout his turbulent reign. The collapse of the monarchy was more than just a political defeat. It was the unraveling of a dream that she had wholeheartedly believed in. The Bourbon family, once poised to restore order and stability to Spain, was now reduced to mere exiles in a foreign land. The political future of Spain seemed uncertain, and the monarchy's role in shaping that future was now an issue of the past. For Maria Victoria, the abdication was a profound loss not only as a queen but also as a woman who had invested much of her identity in the belief that Spain could find peace under the Bourbon banner. The months that followed the abdication were marked by a mix of personal grief and the difficult task of rebuilding her life alongside Amadeo, far from the grandeur and turmoil of the Spanish court. After their departure from Spain, Maria Victoria and Amadeo found solace in Italy. Exile, however, was not an easy transition for the royal family. They had once lived a life of luxury, surrounded by courtiers, advisors, and a powerful political network. Now they were in a new country, stripped of their titles and their political power, without the trappings of royalty. The Italian landscape, while beautiful and historically rich, seemed distant and disconnected from the world they had once known. Their new home was modest in comparison to the royal palaces they had inhabited, and the familiar rituals of court life had disappeared. However, in exile, Maria Victoria discovered new strength. With the collapse of the monarchy in Spain, she became more focused on the private side of life, her family and the future of her children. The role of queen consort had required much of her, but as an exile, Maria Victoria's duties shifted from political alliances to securing the well-being of her family. Amadeo, though defeated, still held a position of importance in European royal circles, and his royal bloodline remained significant, but their lives were now entirely focused on their children and the quiet, dignified life they could carve out in Italy. In many ways, Maria Victoria embraced her role as mother and matriarch with a sense of purpose. The children of Amadeo and Maria Victoria, though they had been born into a world of royal expectations, were now raised in a simpler, quieter environment. Maria Victoria instilled in them a sense of pride in their heritage, despite the downfall of their royal status. She shared stories of their family's legacy, ensuring that they would grow up with an understanding of the Bourbon line's role in Spanish history. Her greatest hope was that, despite the loss of power, the next generation of Bourbons would one day carry forward the values she had cherished. But Maria Victoria's personal sacrifice went beyond merely caring for her children. The political landscape in Spain remained chaotic, and the Republicans continued their struggle to consolidate power. Though her husband's abdication had marked the formal end of the Bourbon monarchy, the Carlists remained steadfast in their belief that the monarchy should return to a Bourbon king. The family's exile allowed them to observe, from a distance, the ongoing turmoil in Spain. The country was now without a clear ruler, and the factions that had opposed Amadeo during his reign continued to battle one another. The Republicans faced growing instability, and the Carlist threat lingered in the form of continued guerrilla warfare and public opposition to the new government. For Maria Victoria, this was a time of reflection. Exiled from the country she had once served as queen, she no longer had the power to influence Spain's future directly. Still, she held on to the belief that the Bourbon monarchy could one day return. Her unwavering loyalty to the Spanish crown and her commitment to preserving the legacy of her family were undiminished. As the years passed in exile, Maria Victoria became more of a symbol than a player in the political landscape. She held onto the dignity of the Bourbon line, ensuring that her children knew the weight of the family's history and the sacrifices that had been made in the name of the Spanish monarchy. In Italy, while living away from the political struggles of Spain, Maria Victoria and Amadeo found solace in their private lives. Their relationship, though tested by the pressures of Amadeo's abdication, remained a source of strength. In their quieter life, they leaned on each other, sharing the burden of their shared history. Amadeo, though once a king, was now a man without a throne. His abdication had been a humiliating blow to his pride, but Maria Victoria's steadfast love and support kept him grounded. In many ways, their relationship deepened in exile as they faced the future together, no longer as the rulers of Spain, but as a family that had lost everything and was forced to rebuild from the ground up. As Maria Victoria adapted to her new life in Italy, she did so with a sense of purpose. The royal duties that had once consumed her had now been replaced with the quiet satisfaction of being a mother and wife. She dedicated herself to her children, ensuring they were educated and raised with the values that had been instilled in her. Despite their fall from power, Maria Victoria understood that the legacy of the Bourbon family lived on in their hearts and in the lessons they imparted to the next generation. Though she had lost the political power she once held, Maria Victoria's personal legacy would continue to shape her family for years to come. Her life in exile was defined not by the loss of a throne but by the strength of her commitment to her family and her unwavering belief in the values that had guided her during her time as queen consort. The political future of Spain might have been uncertain, but Maria Victoria knew that the Bourbon family's history would endure, regardless of the political changes that swept through the country. As Maria Victoria and Amadeo settled into their life in exile in Italy, they were no longer the monarchs of Spain, but they were still members of Europe's royal elite. Their return to Italy marked the end of a brief but turbulent chapter in Spanish history. In exile, far from the political battles of Spain, they tried to adjust to a quieter, more private existence. They now lived under the radar of the intense political turmoil that continued to unravel in Spain, with its fluctuating governments, shifting allegiances, and the simmering resentment of the Carlist supporters who still believed that the throne belonged to the Bourbon family. For Maria Victoria, the transition from the Spanish court, with its opulence and prestige, to a modest life in Italy was a personal challenge. She had once been a queen consort, a figure of political power, representing not just herself but an entire monarchy. Now in exile, she was simply a mother and wife. Her title no longer held the same weight in Europe's royal courts, but her sense of duty and family loyalty remained steadfast. She adapted to this new, humbler role with dignity, focusing her attention on her children and the preservation of the Bourbon name. In Italy, Amadeo I, though officially abdicated, was still a prince by birth and title, but his position was now far removed from the grandeur he once knew in Spain. His life in Italy was defined by a loss of both political power and personal prestige. Yet in this quieter chapter, he found solace in his family. Amadeo became more introspective, focusing on his family and their future. While the political storm in Spain raged on, he was largely removed from the public eye in Italy. But that did not mean he had abandoned his beliefs in the monarchy. Maria Victoria, in many ways, became the pillar of the family in exile. She helped Amadeo adjust to his new role, providing the emotional strength and encouragement he needed to find a sense of peace. She recognized that their time as monarchs had passed, but she also knew that their legacy and the future of their children were still very much in her hands. Maria Victoria ensured that their children were well educated, raised with a deep understanding of their royal heritage, even if they would never rule Spain. She imparted the lessons of responsibility, duty, and honor to her children, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the dignity of the Bourbon name. Despite the initial difficulties, Maria Victoria eventually came to embrace the challenges of her new life. In Italy, she found a degree of normalcy that had been missing from her life in Spain. With the political instability in Spain continuing unabated, she found some comfort in being removed from the fray. The political landscape in Spain continued to be in disarray after Amadeo's abdication, and the First Spanish Republic, though initially filled with promises of democratic change, was a fragile construct. It was clear that the monarchy was unlikely to return to power anytime soon, but Maria Victoria held onto the belief that, in time, the Bourbon family might be called upon to restore order to the Spanish monarchy. The political realities in Spain during this period were unsettling for Maria Victoria, but they were not her primary focus. In her new life in Italy, Maria Victoria shifted her attention to her family and her own personal growth. While she may have felt the loss of power deeply, her role as a mother and wife provided her with a new sense of purpose. She adapted to the more modest lifestyle that exile imposed on her, but she did so with grace and dignity. The world around her may have changed, but Maria Victoria remained a steadfast figure in her family's life, always maintaining a sense of pride in the legacy of the Bourbon dynasty. As the years passed, Maria Victoria and Amadeo found a certain peace in their lives, far removed from the political upheaval that had consumed their reign in Spain. Their exile allowed them time to reflect on their past, their roles in history, and the future of their children. They were no longer the sovereigns of Spain, but they were still members of a royal family with a deep history, and Maria Victoria remained determined to ensure that the values of the Bourbon family would be passed down to the next generation. Even in exile, the political turmoil in Spain continued to haunt the royal family. The Carlists, still loyal to the idea of a Bourbon monarch, continued their campaign, though it never gained enough momentum to overthrow the Republican government. In the years following Amadeo's abdication, the question of who would ultimately restore the Spanish monarchy lingered in the minds of those who still believed in its legitimacy. While Maria Victoria and Amadeo were far removed from the political conflict, they continued to hope for a return to the throne. However, the odds of this happening seemed increasingly slim as the years went by and Spain moved further away from the monarchy. In Italy, Maria Victoria's influence and presence in royal circles were more subdued, but she remained a respected figure. The Italian royal family, too, had its own challenges, and Maria Victoria had forged relationships with other royals who had faced similar struggles. Yet, no matter how far she was from the Spanish court, Maria Victoria's identity as a queen remained a defining aspect of who she was. In private, she would often reminisce about the time when she had held Spain in her hands, guiding the future of the country as its queen consort. Despite the abdication, despite the exile, Maria Victoria's heart remained with Spain, and her legacy as a queen, though unfulfilled in a political sense, lived on in her children. As she and Amadeo aged, they found comfort in their shared history and in the family they had built together. The world had moved on, and the Spain they once ruled had changed forever, but Maria Victoria's dedication to her family and her belief in the Bourbon legacy remained constant. In the end, she would be remembered not for the political power she once held, but for her strength, resilience, and unwavering loyalty to the ideals she believed in. Though the monarchy was no longer part of her life, Maria Victoria's story was one of dignity, devotion, and sacrifice, qualities that would define her legacy for generations to come. Years passed in exile, and though Maria Victoria and Amadeo no longer ruled Spain, the legacy of their time on the throne remained an enduring chapter in the history of both Spain and their own family. In Italy, away from the political struggles of Spain, Maria Victoria found peace, but it was a reflective peace, often tinged with the bittersweet memory of what could have been. Her role as queen consort had been short but deeply impactful, and the personal sacrifices she had made for the monarchy were etched in her mind and heart. Maria Victoria's legacy was not one of political triumph, but of personal strength, loyalty, and a quiet determination to protect her family's name. She had always been a woman of grace and dignity, and even in the face of defeat, she continued to carry the values of the Bourbon family. In exile, her focus shifted. No longer a queen consort with the power to influence Spain's future, she became a matriarch in her own right, guiding her children with the same commitment to duty and honor that had defined her reign. Her children, now growing up far from the Spanish court, were raised with an understanding of the importance of their heritage. Maria Victoria made sure that they understood the political and personal struggles their family had faced. Though they would never wear the crown of Spain, they were still heirs to a royal legacy, and Maria Victoria taught them to respect that legacy. Her children grew up with the knowledge that their family had once stood at the center of Spanish power, and despite the monarchy's fall, they carried the dignity of the Bourbon name with them. Over time, Maria Victoria and Amadeo became figures of history more than active participants in the world of politics. They were no longer central figures in the power struggles that were taking place in Spain. Instead, they lived in relative peace in Italy, observing from afar as the country they had once ruled continued to grapple with its identity and future. The monarchy that they had once tried to preserve seemed to fade further into the past. But their story remained a poignant reminder of the fragility of royal power and the price of loyalty to a cause. Maria Victoria's role as the queen consort who had supported Amadeo through the toughest years of his reign was remembered in historical accounts. While their reign may have been marked by challenges and failure, Maria Victoria's strength and grace were acknowledged by those who looked back at her life. She was not remembered for the political victories she might have hoped for, but for her unwavering commitment to her husband, her family, and her country. In her later years, Maria Victoria often found solace in quiet reflection. She would sometimes visit the places where she and Amadeo had once lived in Spain, remembering the grand ceremonies, the royal functions, and the hopes they had held for their reign. But she had long since come to terms with the loss of her title. She understood that the monarchy's time had passed, and the dreams she had once harbored for Spain were no longer realistic. Still, she held on to the belief that the Bourbon family's legacy would live on, even if it was no longer part of Spain's political future. Her relationship with Amadeo, though tested by their fall from power, remained strong. Over the years, they had forged a bond that was rooted not in the grandeur of their former position but in the quiet support they offered each other in times of hardship. Their life in exile, though far from the royal courts they had once known, became a time of mutual understanding and shared history. In each other, they found a partner who had lived through the same trials and who understood the complexities of their situation. Together, they made the most of their new life, focused on their children and finding joy in small moments. Maria Victoria's role as the Queen Consort of Spain, though brief, had left an indelible mark on her family and on the history of Spain. She had been a loyal and loving partner to Amadeo, a woman who had stood by him through the most difficult years of his reign. While her time on the throne had been cut short by political unrest and war, her legacy as a queen who gave everything for her family and her country would endure. Though she was no longer queen, she remained a figure of strength and resilience, her family's history forever intertwined with her determination and loyalty. Her reflections in exile were often bittersweet. She knew that the return of the Bourbon monarchy to Spain was unlikely, but she still held a small hope that, in time, her family's name would be remembered as one that had played a vital role in the country's history. For Maria Victoria, the importance of family, of legacy, and of duty remained central to her life. While she could not change the course of history, she took pride in the role she had played in that history and in the way she had carried herself as Queen Consort, even during the most difficult of times. Maria Victoria's legacy was not one of political power, but one of personal integrity. She had lived through an era of immense change and had borne the brunt of the challenges that came with being part of a monarchy in decline. But through it all, she had remained true to her values, and in doing so had passed on a legacy of grace, resilience, and devotion to her children and her family. Her story, while not marked by great political victories, remained an important chapter in the history of Spain and in the history of the Bourbon family. Maria Victoria's life, filled with trials and triumphs, represented the strength of a woman who had stood beside her husband through the collapse of a monarchy and had emerged from that experience with her dignity and loyalty intact. In the end, Maria Victoria's greatest legacy was the example she set for those who came after her. A legacy of steadfast devotion, personal sacrifice, and an unyielding belief in the importance of family and honor. The years in exile were marked by a quiet, almost unremarkable life for Maria Victoria and Amadeo. Though they had once been at the heart of the Spanish monarchy, now they lived far from the political turmoil that had defined their earlier years. The passionate hopes of their reign of restoring stability to Spain and uniting the country under a Bourbon monarch had been shattered by the failure of Amadeo's reign and the subsequent collapse of the monarchy. As the years went by, the political landscape of Spain shifted, but it never again saw the return of the Bourbon family to the throne. Maria Victoria and Amadeo, once central figures in European politics, had become figures of the past, with their story largely relegated to the annals of history. They had both been shaped by the events of the 1870s, the brief but intense period of political struggle in Spain that had brought them so close to power and then taken it all away. But now, the betrayal of political factions and the constant warfare had taken their toll on his health. By the time he and Maria Victoria had settled into exile in Italy, Amadeo's health was beginning to deteriorate, though he had initially tried to move forward, focusing on the quiet life of a royal in exile. The weight of the past and his inability to reclaim his throne hung over him like a shadow. Maria Victoria, ever the devoted wife, stood by Amadeo as he fought against illness. She had been with him through every political challenge, every battle, and now, in his final years, she remained his closest confidant and greatest source of support. The years of exile had deepened their bond, and they had found peace in their shared reflections on the past. Maria Victoria cared for Amadeo the one and the way only a wife who had shared a life so tumultuous could. Their love, forged in the fires of Spain's most difficult years, had become the bedrock of their relationship in these later years. Amadeo's death, when it came, was a quiet one. In 1890, after years of declining health, Amadeo passed away in their home in Italy. Maria Victoria was by his side, as she had been throughout their journey. The loss was a devastating blow to her. After everything they had been through, their rise, their fall, their years in exile, she was left to face the world without him. Though she had always known that their time in exile was a far cry from their former glory, losing her husband, who had been her partner in every sense, left a profound emptiness in her heart. The news of Amadeo's death reverberated through the royal circles of Europe. While Spain had long since moved on from the Bourbon monarchy, the end of Amadeo I's life marked the true closing of that chapter. He had been the last of the direct Bourbon monarchs to rule Spain before the monarchy's collapse and the establishment of the First Spanish Republic. Though Amadeo's reign had been brief, and his abdication had marked the failure of his efforts to restore the Bourbon monarchy to Spain, his legacy was not entirely one of defeat. He had been a man of principle, who had taken on an almost impossible task. His death signified the end of a dream, but it also represented the quiet resolution of a man who had given everything for a cause he believed in. Maria Victoria, now a widow, was left to reflect on her life and the history that had shaped it. The years of her marriage to Amadeo had been filled with both extraordinary highs and crushing lows, but through it all she had remained steadfast. She had borne the weight of being queen consort, had endured the trials of exile, and had supported her husband in ways that few could understand. The end of Amadeo's life was, for her, the end of an era, a personal era marked by both loss and legacy. After Amadeo's death, Maria Victoria withdrew further from the public eye. No longer a queen consort, she spent her remaining years in Italy, surrounded by her children and close family. Her role as matriarch became central to her identity. The weight of history, of the family's royal past, was something she continued to carry, but now she passed that history down to her children. She shared with them the story of their family, of the monarchy that had once ruled Spain, and of the sacrifices made to uphold the Bourbon legacy. Despite the political failures and the loss of their royal titles, Maria Victoria remained a figure of quiet strength. She was revered by those who knew her, not for the power she had once wielded, but for her dignity, loyalty, and resilience. Her family continued to look to her as the keeper of their history, and she made sure that the story of the Bourbon monarchy would not be forgotten. She emphasized the values that had been at the core of her life and Amadeo's reign: duty, honor, and sacrifice. Maria Victoria lived for several more years after Amadeo's death, until she, too, passed away in 1896. Her death marked the end of a significant chapter in the Bourbon family's history, though Spain would never again see a Bourbon monarch sit on the throne in the 19th century. Maria Victoria's legacy lived on through her children and the lessons she had imparted to them. In the end, Maria Victoria was remembered not as a queen who ruled a kingdom, but as a woman who had stood by her husband through one of the most challenging periods in Spanish history. Her life had been defined by resilience, loyalty, and the quiet grace with which she faced defeat. While she did not see the restoration of the monarchy she had fought for, her unwavering commitment to her family and her legacy ensured that the Bourbon name would not be forgotten. Maria Victoria's death in 1896 brought an end to an era, one that had been defined by political upheaval, royal dreams, and personal sacrifice. While she had never regained the throne of Spain, and her time as queen consort had been fraught with challenges, her legacy endured long after her passing. The story of her life, though not marked by the political triumphs she had once hoped for, became one of quiet strength, resilience, and devotion to her family. Though Spain had moved on, its monarchy having been replaced by the short-lived republic and later the restoration of the Bourbon family under Alfonso XIII, Maria Victoria's impact lingered in the memories of those who knew her and in the hearts of her children. The Bourbon family, despite the political turmoil that had nearly destroyed it, continued to carry the weight of its royal legacy, and Maria Victoria remained an integral part of that history. In the years following her death, the Bourbon name began to resurface in the history of Spain. Her children, who had been raised in exile, continued to honor the memory of their parents and their royal heritage. They were keenly aware of the sacrifices made by their mother, who had borne the pain of defeat with grace and had instilled in them the values that had been at the core of the Bourbon monarchy: loyalty, honor, and duty. Maria Victoria's commitment to the Bourbon legacy and her quiet strength as a mother and matriarch left an indelible mark on her children. Her descendants, who lived in both Italy and Spain, would go on to carry her legacy in their own ways, each of them trying to honor the memory of the family that had once ruled Spain. The story of Maria Victoria and Amadeo I would live on as a reminder of the fragility of power, the sacrifices made for a cause, and the enduring importance of family. Though the monarchy in Spain had been replaced by republicanism, the Bourbon name continued to resonate with those who remembered the sacrifices made by the family. Over time, the political landscape of Spain would evolve once again with the restoration of the monarchy in the 20th century, but Maria Victoria's story was one that remained in the history books. Woven into the fabric of Spain's complex royal narrative, it wasn't the political victories that defined her life, but the personal choices she made, the family she nurtured, and the quiet dignity with which she carried the weight of her royal past. As the years passed, Maria Victoria became not only a symbol of the Bourbon family's trials and tribulations, but also a representation of the resilience of the human spirit. She had endured great loss, had sacrificed her own personal desires for the sake of her family and the monarchy, and had faced the downfall of everything she had worked for with unwavering dignity. In the end, Maria Victoria's legacy was about more than just royal lineage. It was about the values she passed on to her children, the strength she demonstrated in adversity, and the love she had for her family. Her life story, once marked by political failure, now stood as a testament to the enduring power of family, loyalty, and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The Bourbon dynasty, despite its fall and eventual restoration, would always carry the memory of Maria Victoria as one of its most dedicated and loyal figures. Her quiet influence, her grace under pressure, and her devotion to the values that had defined her reign would never be forgotten. Maria Victoria's legacy was not written in the annals of history through political triumphs or the restoration of a monarchy. Instead, it was etched in the hearts of her children, who carried her teachings and her love for her family into their own lives. She may not have worn a crown in her later years, but her place in the royal story of Spain and in the legacy of the Bourbon family remained firmly established. Her story, one of perseverance, loyalty, and love, would be told for generations to come, not as a tale of political victory, but as a story of a woman who, through the loss of everything, held on to the most important things of all, her family, her values, and her unwavering commitment to those she loved.